Alright, so first things I did, disconnect the negative and positive battery, took off the air box, disconnected the ICMs first to take the air box off, take off the Y pipe, disconnect the turbo inlet pipes to the Y pipe on both sides, and then your fuel rail is exposed and your intake manifold. You can work closer in now. Alright, I'm trying to do maintenance on my PCV valve. I gotta remove this hose clamp and this one right here. Also, this check valve broke right there, so I gotta get some hose clamps for this. And these three hoses go into the fuel rail. The blue one goes to the top line, the white one goes to the bottom line, and the longer one goes to the left side. Also, I have these two that go to the vacuum block that feed the vacuum booster for the brakes. So I'm gonna have to take these off and replace those with some hose clamps too. I found a boost leak. My throttle body boot is torn. Look at that, and that's right by the PSI sensor too. The PSI sensor's right here. So with the MAF disconnected, I was running super bad. Good thing I have a silicone hose I can put there. I disconnected a bunch of different connectors here. This one for the PCV valve, O2 heaters, the rear cam connector, the spark plug coil pack connectors. These two go to the throttle body and the pressure gauge, and then I've been trying to get the hoses off so I can get this other one off down here. Then I can move this harness out of the way and get the PCV valve out. There's one last connection down here that I need to disconnect. I disconnected the quick piece on the PCV valve here and here on each side of the head. Alright, before I disconnect this last connector, actually to get to the little quick release pin, I gotta finish removing the intake manifold. But I did disconnect the front cam sensor, and I gotta disconnect the one on this side so I can get to the coil packs on this side and the connectors. Take off the harness to get the harness out on this side, and then it'll make taking the intake manifold off easier. I disconnected the electrical connector from the N249 valve and the hose, this hose running from the fuel pressure regulator to the vacuum line on the manifold, and then disconnecting these two hoses on top and one over here. And then I just need to take out these Allen screws, 4 Allen screws, number 5 Allen, to get the fuel rail off. For the fuel rail lines, we got this one back here. I gotta disconnect. This is the fuel line, and then this is the fuel return line. So I just gotta take these two off, and then I can finish getting the fuel rail off. Disconnected this vacuum source for the N249 check valve. Disconnected this side of the 3 lines for the fuel. Alright, there's one more vacuum line underneath the fuel rail. Okay, there's actually another check valve that goes to the throttle body. That's probably for the idle control. But I'm gonna break this hose clamp off, and then it's coming out. Fuel rail is off from that hose, and I had to disconnect the rear cam sensors too to get this part of the harness out of the way. This has all the injectors and spark plugs on the other side of the engine. Then we just need more of these Allen bolts to get the manifold off. Okay, there's 16 5mm Allens, and then the one connector, that one harness connector that I was trying to get to is actually underneath the throttle body. So that's where that connects. Now I can put this other side of the harness out of the way. And I need to take off these two 10mm bolts to get these O2 sensor heater units off. And then there's some fittings on this manifold here. This connector, gotta take off. After disconnecting those two bolts holding the O2 sensors on, this whole bracket comes out. That's actually for the PCV valve. And now we can take out the intake manifold, yeah! All right, the last connector clip right here. So once I get that one out, then the whole PCV spider hose comes out. Got the spider valve out. This is all the connections for the crankcase ventilation. And you can see down here it's got some clogging. So I'm pretty sure that it's like that all the way through. So I'm gonna go ahead and spray some kind of degreaser and then spray it through with the air hose to clean out all the junk. But first I'm gonna take off this piece, this one up here, because this is like a one-way check valve, so you can mess it up. But everything else is just pass-through hoses, so they can be cleaned. All right, I sprayed penetrating oil in all the ports, and then I flushed it through a couple times with the shop air. So I went ahead and just put a couple rags on the intake manifold ports, and then one on each side of the intercooler piping. All right, I'm taking off this hose. I think it's part of the check valve assembly, so I can find one of the same diameter so I can recut these, because they were too short, and that's why the check valve broke in the first place, because it had too much torque on it. And this other hose on the vacuum solenoid of these two sizes. The cat decided to help. I gotta take out this other hose piece too, because I'm gonna have to replace the check valve anyway. I reconnected this vacuum check valve with a bunch of hose clamps, and I reconnected the PCV spider assembly as well. Got the intake manifold torqued down evenly, and I reconnected the bracket for the O2 heaters. The fuel rail, I connected all the hoses. Boom, boom. The vacuum port to the intake manifold. Put some hose clamps on the fuel return line, connected the fuel line and a hose clamp for the vacuum source. Went ahead and reconnected all the lower hoses. Everything that I had to take off that had like one of those one-time use clamps, I replaced with hose clamps. And then two right here. Got the check valve all hooked up. And on a side note, I have the, secondary air intake. I got those plugged off with a 50-cent piece. Anyways, both sides, and no secondary air pump. That's already coated out from the chipped ECU. The new throttle body boot is attached. I had to go get a bunch of hose clamps for these three right here, and we're attached on the two intercoolers. All the electrical connections are finished. You know, cam connectors, the one underneath intake manifold, pressure, throttle position, all the spark plugs and fuel injectors, N249 valve, all these other O2 sensors, and this other check valve, rear cam sensors on both sides, and the coils on both sides. The piping, I just got to tighten up the hose clamps, and I used the rags that were blocking to kind of clean up all the road oil and make them look nice and clean. The Y pipe is now attached, and so are the hose clamps on the upper piping. The air box is connected. New hose clamp up there. I already had one there. MAF is connected. ICMs. The battery is connected.